The arrests of Harrison H. Dodd, Lambton P. Milligan, and the other leaders of the Sons of Liberty in October 1864 were swift, surgical, and devastating. The federal authorities had prevented the Election Day catastrophe, but the war was far from over. The political war now moved indoors, into the tense, echoing silence of a military courtroom in Indianapolis. President Lincoln and his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, viewed the Copperhead conspiracy not as simple criminality, but as an act of war, an insurrection aided by a foreign enemy, the Confederacy. Therefore, the conspirators were not taken to a civilian jail to await a jury of their peers. They were confined in a military prison and brought before a military commission. The atmosphere was thick with tension and high drama. The commission, composed of 5 high-ranking Union officers, sat as judge and jury. The defense, led by fierce Copperhead sympathizers and some of the best constitutional lawyers of the time, immediately attacked the jurisdiction of the court. The central argument, the defense. Milligan's lawyers argued that since Indiana was not a theater of active military combat, civilian courts were functioning and law enforcement was operational. Milligan, a civilian, could not constitutionally be tried by a military tribunal. He was entitled to a grand jury and a trial by jury. The prosecution, the Union, the federal government, represented by the military judge advocate, argued that Indiana was a threatened area, essentially within the theater of military operations, because of the immense scale of the conspiracy. They asserted that the very existence of an organized, armed force seeking to free 8,000 enemy prisoners made the state unstable and justified the use of martial law to ensure national survival. The fate of the defendants and the very limits of presidential power during a national emergency rested on this point. The lightning strikes the witness stand. The case for the Union rested almost entirely on the shoulders of one man, Felix G. Stidger, the Lightning. Stidger, abandoning his alias, took the stand. He was young, calm, and utterly meticulous. His lack of notes was initially a source of scorn from the defense lawyers, who mocked his reliance on memory. They suggested he was a mere political operative fabricating testimony to please his Union paymasters. But Stidger's testimony was not a political speech. It was a verbatim transcription of treason. He calmly recounted in exact detail the ritual, the secret oaths, and the handshakes of the Sons of Liberty. He provided the precise language of Milligan and Dodd, detailing their plan to cut the wires, seize the banks, and burn Chicago. Then he delivered the most devastating blow, the financial proof. He recalled the specific amounts of British sterling and gold he handled, the dates and locations of the transfers, and the names of the Confederate agents who had financed the arms shipments from Canada. His memory was photographic, his recall perfect, and the volume of specific, interlocking details, names, dates, code words, and currency exchanges overwhelmed the defense. I witnessed the conversion of large sums of money designated for the purchase of rifles, Stidger testified, pointing directly at the defendants. The funds were confirmed to me being supplied by the Confederate Secret Service in Canada, specifically from agents of Jacob Thompson. He detailed the organization's structure, naming the specific county commanders and their troop counts, proving this was a vast, coordinated military threat, not just a handful of angry men. Stidger's testimony was corroborated by the silent evidence in the room, the seized ledgers of James A. Barrett, which matched the name Stidger cited, and the captured weapons cache, proving the intent to commit armed violence. The military commission listened, and the doubt faded. The conspiracy was real. The threat was immense. The sentence and the appeal. In the final days of the commission, the verdicts were delivered. Lambton P. Milligan, Harrison H. Dodd and several others were found guilty on all charges, including conspiracy against the government and inciting insurrection. The sentence was immediate and chilling: death by hanging. The execution date was set for May 19, 1865. However, the war ended just weeks before their scheduled execution. Lincoln was assassinated, and the nation was plunged into mourning and political uncertainty. The sentences of the Copperhead conspirators suddenly became a lightning rod for the new administration under President Andrew Johnson. Milligan and his lawyers immediately petitioned the federal court for a writ of habeas corpus, arguing that their detention and conviction by a military court were illegal under the Constitution. The case was too significant for a lower court to decide. It quickly bypassed the circuit court and went directly to the Supreme Court of the United States. The legal fight in the Supreme Court, known as Ex parte Milligan, became a defining moment for the American Republic. Could the government suspend fundamental constitutional rights, like the right to a jury trial, to save itself from a clear and present danger?
The very traitors who sought to overthrow the Constitution were now using that Constitution to save their lives. The Supreme Court heard arguments for Ex parte Milligan in March 1866. The nation watched. The court question was simple: does the Constitution still protect citizens from military justice when civil courts are functioning even in the midst of the most dire national crisis? The court, led by Chief Justice Salmon P. Chase and Justice David Davis, a close friend of Lincoln, was deeply divided on some issues. But on the main point, their decision was unanimous. The military commission had no jurisdiction to try Milligan and his co-conspirators. In his majority opinion, Justice Davis delivered a powerful rebuke of unlimited executive power during wartime. The Constitution of the United States is a law for rulers and people, equally in time of war and peace, and covers with the shield of its protection all classes of men, at all times and under all circumstances. No doctrine involving more pernicious consequences was ever invented by the wit of man than that any of its provisions can be suspended during any of the exigencies of the government. The court ruled that military tribunals could only be used to try civilians where civil courts were entirely shut down due to invasion or rebellion, or if the civilian was part of the armed services. Since the civil courts of Indiana were open and operating, Milligan should have been tried by a jury. Result: the death sentences were overturned. Lambden P. Milligan and the other convicted traitors were ordered to be released. They had been proven guilty of high treason by the testimony of Stidger and the evidence of the seized weapons, but the Supreme Court chose to uphold the precedence of civil liberties over the perceived necessity of wartime justice. Milligan walked free, having spent 18 months in a military prison. The Union was saved from the Copperheads, but in doing so, the American justice system established a monumental legal principle: that martial law cannot exist where the courts are open. The victory of the spies, Kincaid and Stidger, who saved the Midwest, ironically led to the ultimate legal vindication of the traitors they exposed, forever solidifying the constitutional protections against tyranny, even for those who plot against the government. The Copperhead conspiracy failed to destroy the Union, but it defined the limits of executive power in the crises that followed.